the blockade now of Odessa is is a move that, frankly, I think Russia should have made 3 years ago,
Right.
but they didn't because they had made an agreement with the UN, and you know, if there's one big fault with the Russians, is they take these agreements too damn seriously. I mean, they really think, hey, we've got an obligation to uphold international law, whereas they're dealing with the West, who just says they don't care about international law. No such thing doesn't apply to us. But now that they've shut it down, the the import of weapon systems not happening, import of other critical items for the industrial production not happening, and the export of grain, which is a major revenue source for the government, not happening. So this is, I think this represents a whole new initiative on the part of the Russian Ministry of Defense, that they're taking the war in a different direction. They're right now launching attacks in along 7, 8 different axes. You start with Chernihiv in the north, Sumy in the north, Kharkiv in the northeast, Donetsk, where the prospects to take full control of that in the near future is appearing brighter. Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Odessa. So when we put all those together, this is quite different from previous years in which the Russians would only focus axes of attack on one or two axes. Now they've got the full complement of troops, and in spite of these lies that come out of the West about Russia suffering massive casualties, implying that they're doing human wave assaults on the Ukrainian positions, which actually what the Russians are doing is inflicting more casualties than would be normal on the Ukrainians while minimizing their own casualties. And they do that through a combination of artillery barrages. Russia has a 4-to-1 advantage, 3.5-to-1 advantage over Ukraine. So like Ukraine has fired 7 million artillery rounds, Russia's fired almost 24 million. So they fired the artillery barrages at troop emplacements. Then they hit those troop emplacements with drones. And they also hit them with missiles. And then they hit them with fab bombs, these glide bombs that some of them are up to 6,000 pounds, 3,000 kilograms, just enormous. And when those hit, apart from the blast damage, the concussive wave within a certain radius can kill people. They don't have to get hit with shrapnel or even the blast effect, just the concussive wave kills. So what this is doing is inflicting more and more casualties on the Ukrainians, and they're already desperately short of men. Whereas in Russia, they've already reached their recruiting threshold for as of this month. They're actually turning people away. So whereas in Ukraine, they're having to send out press gangs to grab people off the street and force them in to military service.
You mentioned the human cost, and so when I look at the Ukrainian channels on Telegram, for example, and I follow certain cities to keep up with what's going on, I notice that on a daily basis there are reports of multiple Ukrainian soldiers' funerals at any given city. And you
Mhm.
see that on a daily basis. Anyone can go follow those channels, and that's what you will see. There will be, you know, two, three, four announcements of funerals being held at practically every city.
Right.
And then we also see videos of Ukrainian military cemeteries running effectively out of space, stretching for several kilometers, several miles at a time. And there are plenty of those videos as well in social media. But Zelensky has never addressed and has never revealed how many Ukrainian soldiers are lost. So, what is your understanding of the
Well,
actual?
actually, correction,
Yes,
he has. They've only lost 50,000.
right, exactly. Yeah. So that's his number,
Sorry.
right?
Yeah.
Yes. No, I'm glad that you
Or
brought it up because
or,
that
or
that gives
50
us,
or sometimes it's 55,000. He can't keep them straight.
yeah. Yeah. And then it just gives us, gives you an idea of Zelensky's narrative and then the reality on the ground. But what is your understanding of the actual military casualties, of the actual military human toll on both
Sure.
sides of the conflict?
Well, have you been to Russia lately, or have you not visited at all?
Not lately, no.
Okay, so there are these things called cell phones, smartphones. The Russians have them, believe it or not, and they also have access to the internet and social media. And what you don't see in Russia is the posting of those videos like you're describing are taking place in Ukraine. Of here the funeral for these 4 or 5 soldiers from this village. Um, Here are the cemeteries. Here are the freshly dug graves, row upon row. And it's not just one or two isolated. I mean, it's pervasive.
Yeah.
You see that in Ukraine. You don't see that in Russia. So that means you got to step back and say, okay, how are casualties inflicted on an army? And you've got, you know, sort of 5 basic ways. Well, you can get shot with a bullet, uh, or you can get hit with artillery and or mortar rounds. You can get hit with drones. You can get hit with glide bombs,
Mhm.
and or you can get hit with ballistic missiles. Now, so we go through every one of those categories. Let's take out getting shot because the very, very, very few numbers are caused by getting shot with a bullet. Uh, Artillery, as I mentioned earlier, right for every 4 shells Russia fires, Ukraine can fire 1. So that means the odds that Russia is going to inflict more casualties on Ukraine are far higher because they're firing 4 times as many. Uh, Drones. Again, Russia enjoys a decisive advantage on that front. Yeah, Ukraine's flying drones and Ukraine is inflicting casualties. These are usually not mass casualties. These are casualties in the order of, 1, 2, or 3 people. Um, but still, Russia there enjoys about a 3-to-1 advantage over Ukraine. So that means chance who's going to have more casualties? Well, Ukraine, not Russia. Uh, then with the FAB bombs, the glide bombs, when you've got the Ukrainians entrenched in a large building, and it gets hit with a 6,000 pound bomb, it obliterates that building, killing or wounding everybody in there. So again, where are the casualties most likely to occur? On the Russian side or on the Ukrainian side? And the answer is on the Ukrainian side. And then the same with ballistic missiles. No Russian has to be forward of the line when the ballistic missiles is launched. It can be done from the rear. So I think the actual number for dead Ukrainians is probably well above 1.5 million. Number of dead Russians appears to be a little more than 200,000. Significant number. I don't want to
Mhm.
minimize that at all, but it's a far cry from the mass casualties that Ukraine's suffering. And then you come back to, well, what what's the population of Ukraine right now? About 21 million. What's the population of Russia? About 140 million. So Russia has a far larger pool of manpower it can draw upon than Ukraine can. So in terms of casualties and losses, despite Western propaganda, it's Ukraine that's suffering the biggest blow.
Zelensky says that Ukraine has presented Washington with new proposals for ending the war, but apparently he has not received the level of support that he expected from Donald Trump. Now, at the same time, Zelensky also said that he continues to refuse to withdraw forces from Donbass, and he insists on security guarantees still. Larry, from your perspective, what does this tell us about the sort of fundamental gap between what Washington wants and what Washington is pursuing and what Kiev is trying to achieve?
Zelensky's like a farmer in Louisiana that lives alongside the Mississippi River, and he's built up some dikes, some uh, levees to try to keep the water out. Only there's a flood that's come, and the water's pouring over the levee. And the farmer says, "Yeah, we're okay. We're not going to abandon the property because we can stop the flood." Well, he's not God. That farmer ain't God. He can't stop the rain,
Yeah.
and those floods will destroy the farm. And that's exactly what's happening to Ukraine. Zelensky can claim, "Oh, we're not going to surrender that territory." Well, whether you choose to or not, it's going to be surrendered for you because the Russians are going to occupy it. A friend of mine sent me a note yesterday in which the Ukrainians are still claiming that they control Pokrovsk.
Hmm.
I mean, they lost that 4 months ago, but they insist, "Oh, no, no, we still got control of Pokrovsk." Okay. This kind of delusional behavior where you say things that are provably false, but nonetheless, they continue to say it, and a lot in the West believe it. And the Russians, my real one critical criticism of the Russians is they are terrible at their information operation.
Hmm.
They've got the worst PR campaign in the world. I'm not talking about lying. I'm talking about just getting the truth out, telling the story exactly how it's unfolding. For example, they're constantly confronted with this charge that they've barely made any progress. All they've got to do is create a visual map with colors, and you can see 2022, 2023, 2024, 20, where you can visibly see the movement,
Hmm.
where it's undeniable. Do they do that? No. I mean, really, I do get quite frustrated with watching, Russia's got so they've got a good story to tell, and they do a damn poor job of telling it.
Yeah. I think Iran could teach them a thing or two
Oh,
about
oh,
social media presence.
yeah, in fact, I did a video a couple of weeks ago calling Russia out on this and saying, for God's sakes, guys, go to Iran, hire those kids that are doing the Lego videos.
Right.
They're genius,
Hmm.
absolute genius.
Yes.
I mean, that's some of the most effective information operation I've seen ever.
Right.
It's contemporary, it's smart, it's funny, it's memorable,
Hmm.
it's watchable,
Yeah.
and it just, it really, it set the standard for how this ought to be done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Larry, do you believe that Washington still has meaningful leverage over Kiev, who uses American ammunitions
Yeah,
and weapons? Or
yeah.
has the United States gradually lost the ability to control Zelensky's regime?
No, no, they've got leverage. The money, always the money. And plus the leverage with the Department of Defense internal inspector generals had opened an investigation of a criminal investigation for the theft of U.S. Aid, and the Trump administration is doing nothing with that. They're just sort of, oh well, not a priority. Yeah, no, Trump's the worst president ever.
Exactly. And it's interesting because he sort of perceives this as a business deal, but then this is exactly the same war that he claimed he could finish in 24 hours. And yet here we are in the second half of 2026, and if anything, the conflict is ramping up and is spreading because we see the Baltic states now being quite aggressive. Now we see Japan starting to reassert its claims, and it doesn't appear to be anywhere close to, as you mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, to winding down.
Yeah,
And of course, amid all of this, Ukraine continues to strike Russian refineries and warehouses with civilian items such as wild berries, as well as strategic infrastructure more than 1,000 kilometers inside Russia. On the battlefield, as you said, Ukraine continues to lose territory. So, what is Zelensky's game plan with these long-range strikes as he continues to lose territory and really, run out of men to send to the front?
Yeah, hope ain't a strategy, and that's all he's got. He's hoping that somehow Russia collapses. I'd like, you and the people that are watching or listening to, create sort of a side-by-side comparison. So first look at the size of Ukraine compared to the physical size of Iran. Iran's 3 times bigger than Ukraine, roughly. And Ukraine's a big country.
Mhm.
Um, then look at the volume of missiles, bombs, mortar, the kind of the lethal force that's been applied to Ukraine by Russia over the last 4.5 years. Compare that with the lethal force the United States delivered against Iran since the 28th of February. Does anybody want to argue that the United States did more in 42 days than the Russians have to Ukraine in 4 years plus? No, it's not. It doesn't even begin to compare the level of destruction that Russia has visited upon Ukraine. Yet, Ukraine, even with this cocaine cowboy as its president, has still remained largely intact. So why is it that we in the United States think that with us delivering far, far less of firepower on Iran, that it's going to cause Iran to collapse? But as I said, Iran's 3 times the size of Ukraine, for God's sake. And so our failure to appreciate the scale and to understand what Russia's air war, essentially this air war with missiles and drones, the limits, it has physical limits on what it can accomplish, which
Mhm.
is why you have to have the ground component as well, and why Russia right now is accelerating on the ground. And, very well before the end of the year, we could see Kyiv threatened with occupation and Odessa threatened. So it is just to keep it in mind. It helps, it helps to balance out a lot of the hysteria where we ascribe great things to our own military efforts in Iran,
Mhm.
exaggerating the effects and minimizing the measurable effects of what Russia's doing in Ukraine, and showing that even with that massive firepower advantage that the Russia enjoys over Ukraine, it doesn't magically force the Ukrainians to surrender.
Exactly. And even if Washington might want to end the war, but it is the regime in Kiev and European governments who believe that time is still on Ukraine's side. But as is the case with any war, with any conflict, with any military conflict, there is a point in time where the front may collapse. And
Yeah.
given Russia's overwhelming power, that point in time might not be too far away. Larry, what is your perception of Ukraine's ability to withstand the current pace of Russian advance on the ground, and also the impact of the blockade on what remains of its economy as a factor that enables it to carry on the war?
No, they are utterly dependent on the West financially and for military equipment. But the other thing is, even if they got all the financial support in the world, all the military equipment in the world, who's going to use it?
Mhm.
They've relied heavily on a number of outside mercenaries. I can't believe the number of Colombians and Brazilians that have been sucked into this war that are dying needlessly there. Um, so the manpower issue is the critical one for Ukraine. It's not just that you got warm bodies in uniform. Do you have people who are trained and competent to carry out the various missions? And the answer to that is no.
Right. And of course, Ukraine relies fully on instructors from Western countries, from Western weapons. So it is it's not capable of really sustaining any level of conflict without without that assistance.
Well, and it's not only, and we raised the issue of the Western supplied weapons. Big problem there is the West, for most of the advanced weaponry that it would like to send to Ukraine, is out of it. They've
Mhm.
exhausted the supply and they can't produce more because to produce them requires the use of rare earth minerals um, that are controlled by China. The processed rare earth minerals that are controlled by China.
Right. I've also seen reports indicating that intelligence sharing is now very similar to the levels during the Biden era. So it seems that the Trump administration, sort of paused certain intelligence sharing for a certain amount of time, but now it's very comparable or is the same as it used to be during Biden. So what is Trump truly trying to achieve here?
Well, he keeps trying to play both sides. I question somewhat the reports and claims about the intelligence sharing
Hmm.
uh, because at the same time we just saw a secret negotiation that got the release of an American U.S. Marine who had been tried, convicted for assault on police, um, and he was the Russians let him go without seeking a quid pro quo from the United States. So it may be that, or whatever quid pro quo they got was connected to intelligence sharing, for example. So there's not going to be a visible announcement about that.
Hmm. Very interesting. Um, in recent days, I noticed several interesting reports from Europe, and we've now seen explosions or major fires at ammunition facilities in Bulgaria and now Italy today. Those happened within days of each other, following previous incidents at munitions facilities in Spain and also the Czech Republic. Both of the most recent incidents involve facilities connected to ammunition production, and both occurred amid Europe's, of course, major expansion of effectively its militarization drive. There is currently no evidence that these incidents are connected, as far as I'm aware, but are they a coincidence or is there something more to this? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm never a big believer in coincidence, but um, it would not be, it wouldn't surprise me if the Russians set in motion a covert operation to sabotage and destroy these factories. That's quite doable. Uh, but it also could be, these could be caused as a result, as a result of a decision. Okay, let's increase our production, and with pressure to increase production, that they get sloppier, more careless in their production methods. And when you're working around explosives, that's the last thing you want. The last thing you want is carelessness.
True. And Larry, now that the blockade in the Black Sea is intensifying, you mentioned that Kiev and even Odessa might be next on the sort of the target list in terms of
Yeah, yeah.
Russia taking control. But what do you feel is the next step in that on that escalation ladder, since Kiev refuses to withdraw troops from Donbas, the same territory that it continues to lose control of. So it's extremely illogical for Zelensky to continue saying, well, I'm not going to I'm not going to leave Donbas while he's unable to sustain the war effort. So what's
Yeah,
next on that escalation ladder?
yeah, you could potentially see Russia launching an amphibious landing operation, you know, bringing in troops amphibiously and maybe with paratroopers as well, just to take and, retake and occupy Odessa. I don't think there's a significant Ukrainian military force there right now. And then once they secure Odessa, then they'll have a forward launching operation that drones and artillery will go deeper into Ukraine. Now, look, Ukraine's fate is sealed. Um, it is, it's like if you're on a ship in the North Atlantic, the ship sinks, and you're in the icy water. Doesn't matter how strong a swimmer you are, that the loss of thermal energy, you're gonna freeze to death. It's just you don't have any way to keep yourself warm. Ukraine doesn't have any way to keep itself resupplied, both with manpower and with all the necessary equipment it needs, including air power, to try to wage war to stop Russia. And the Russians, with each outrage, as Ukraine tries to attack civilian targets further in Russia, it just further reinforces the Russian desire to destroy Ukraine.
Oh, what do you think are Russia's minimum acceptable peace terms at this time? It seems that, just the four oblasts are no longer enough to create that buffer zone that the
Right.
regime in Kiev really wants to exploit against Russia.
Yeah, the complete withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from east of the Dnieper River, and and the the they will then set in motion a process to give those remaining oblasts that are not currently part of the Russian Federal Republic. So they give Dnipropetrovsk, Chernigiv, Sumy, Kharkiv the option to vote to join the Russian Federation. So yeah, no, I think this is not going to end until essentially Kiev and Odessa are under Russian control and inhabited by Russian officials.